The steel corridors of the Acheron research facility stretched endlessly, illuminated by the cold glow of overhead lights. With each step, the sound of my boots intensified as I approached the control room, the reinforced doors hissing open to reveal the central hub of our operation. "Morning, Harris," Dr. Crane grunted, not looking up from his console. His fingers flew over the touchscreen, inputting the final parameters for today's test. "Morning," I replied, glancing at the monitors. The main screen displayed the test chamber, a stark white room dominated by the latest iteration of the Void Walker suit. The suit stood on a platform, its black material absorbing the light around it. Designed to allow the wearer to survive unaided in the vacuum of space, it was a marvel of engineering. Or so we thought. "Subject 13 ready?" I asked, noting the time. "Prepped and waiting," Crane said, finally turning to face me. His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles underlining the intensity of his gaze. "This one's a veteran, served 10 years in deep space mining. If anyone can handle the suit, it's him." I nodded, watching the screen as the door to the test chamber opened. Subject 13 stepped in, clad in a standard-issue jumpsuit. He looked around, taking in the environment, before his eyes landed on the suit. There was no fear in his gaze, only a resigned determination. He knew the risks, had been briefed thoroughly, yet he volunteered. They always did. "Let's get started," Crane muttered, turning back to his console. I activated the intercom. "Subject 13, please proceed to the platform and don the suit," I instructed. He complied without hesitation, stepping onto the platform and beginning the process of suiting up. The material molded to his body, sensors activating with a soft hum. The helmet clicked into place, the HUD lighting up to display vital statistics. "Vitals are stable," Crane reported. "Suit integrity at 100%. All systems nominal." "Proceed with Phase 1, I said. Crane nodded, initiating the sequence. The airlock on the far side of the chamber hissed open, revealing the void beyond. Tension filled the control room as we watched. This was the critical moment. "Subject 13, please step into the airlock," I instructed. He moved with measured steps, entering the airlock. The inner door sealed behind him, and I could see his breaths coming slower, more deliberate. "Initiating decompression," Crane announced. The outer door of the airlock opened, exposing Subject 13 to the vacuum of space. The suit's readings remained stable, showing no signs of failure. For a moment it seemed we had succeeded. Then the monitors flashed. Static filled the screens and Subject 13's vitals spiked. "What's happening?" I demanded, leaning over Crane's shoulder. "Unknown," he replied, fingers dancing over the controls in a desperate attempt to regain clarity. The static intensified, and then, as abruptly as it started, it stopped. The screens cleared, showing an empty airlock. Subject 13 was gone. "Where the hell did he go?" I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The airlock's outer door was still open, but there was no sign of the test subject, just the cold, black expanse of space. "Bring him back," Crane ordered, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew, as well as I did, that there was no bringing him back. Not from that. "We've lost another one," I said, slumping back in my chair. The same thing had happened with the previous subjects. They vanished, reappearing hours or days later, with no memory of the event and speaking an unknown language. It was like the void took them, and when it gave them back, they were different. Changed. "Prepare for debrief," Crane said, rubbing his temples. "And let's hope Subject 13 reappears soon." I nodded, already dreading the next steps. The suits were supposed to be our breakthrough, a way to conquer the final frontier. But the void held secrets we hadn't anticipated, dangers we couldn't comprehend. The screen stayed empty, a dark void staring back at us. Crane was already halfway through inputting commands to initiate a scan of the surrounding space. "Initiate full sweep," I ordered, my voice sounding more resolute than I felt. "Scan for any anomalies. Let's see if we can pick up a trace." The scanners whirred to life, their mechanisms vibrating through the console. We watched the screen intently, hoping for any sign of Subject 13. A few tense minutes passed, each second dragging longer than the last. Crane's fingers drummed on the console, a rare display of impatience from the usually stoic scientist. "Nothing," Crane finally muttered, leaning back in his chair. "No signs of debris, no energy fluctuations, nothing. It's like he was never there." I stared at the screen. This wasn't the first time a subject had disappeared during the trials, but the complete lack of data was new. It was as if the void had swallowed him whole, leaving no trace behind. "Prepare the logs for analysis," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to figure out what the hell is happening to them out there." Crane nodded, already transferring the data to our secure server. The door to the control room slid open and Captain Reyes strode in. His tall frame and commanding presence immediately filled the room. He looked from Crane to me, his expression unreadable. "Another one gone?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "Subject 13 vanished during Phase 1. No trace, no anomalies detected." Reyes sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Damn it, this project is becoming more trouble than it's worth. The brass wants results, not more missing personnel." "We're doing everything we can," Crane interjected, frustration evident in his voice. "But the data we get back is inconsistent, fragmented. Something out there is interfering with our equipment." "Something," Reyes repeated, his tone skeptical. "Or someone. You think it could be sabotage?" Crane shook his head. "No, it's not sabotage, it's something else. Something we don't understand yet." "Keep at it," Reyes ordered. "We need answers. The suits were supposed to give us an edge, not more questions." As Reyes left the room, I turned to Crane. "What do we have on the previous subjects? Any common factors?" Crane pulled up the files on the previous test subjects. Each case was disturbingly similar. Experienced personnel, no signs of malfunction in the suits, and then they simply vanished. When they reappeared, their vitals were normal, but they couldn't remember anything. Worse, they started speaking in a language none of our systems could identify. "Look at this," Crane said, highlighting a section of data. "This pattern here. It's a low-frequency oscillation in their brain activity. It starts just before they vanish and continues for a few minutes after they reappear." "What does it mean?" I asked, leaning in closer. "I'm not sure," Crane admitted, "but it suggests some kind of external influence. Something is affecting their neural activity during the process." "Could it be a side effect of the suit?" I suggested, though I knew it was unlikely. "No," Crane said firmly. "The suits are just tools. Whatever's happening, it's not coming from them." I mulled over his words, a growing sense of dread creeping into my thoughts. If it wasn't the suits, then the source had to be the void itself. An unknown force, one we had no way of understanding or controlling. "We need more data," I said finally. "We can't keep sending people out there blindly. We need to understand what's happening before we lose anyone else." Crane nodded in agreement. "I'll run a deeper analysis on the brainwave patterns. Maybe there's something we've missed." As Crane got to work, I turned back to the monitors. The airlock was still open, the dark expanse of space looming beyond it. As I watched the void, I knew one thing for certain. We were no longer alone in our exploration. Something out there was watching us, and it wasn't friendly. The next few hours became a rush of data analysis and futile attempts to find any trace of Subject 13. Crane was buried in his work. I made my rounds, checking in with other departments and ensuring everyone was on high alert. The disappearances had everyone on edge. "Anything yet?" I asked Crane, returning to the control room. He shook his head, frustration evident in his features. "Nothing concrete, just more questions. The brainwave patterns are consistent, but I can't pinpoint the source." Before I could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, and the intercom came alive with a burst of static. "Unscheduled re-entry detected," the voice announced. "Subject 13 has reappeared in the airlock." Crane and I exchanged a glance, then rushed to the monitors. The airlock camera showed Subject 13 standing there, the suit's visor reflecting the harsh light. He was motionless, staring straight ahead. "Open the airlock," I ordered. "Get him out of there." Crane initiated the sequence and the inner door of the airlock slid open. Subject 13 stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. As he entered the facility, 2 medics rushed to his side, guiding him to a nearby examination table. "Vitals are stable," one of the medics reported. "No visible injuries." I approached the table, noting the blank expression on Subject 13's face. His eyes were unfocused, as if he were looking through me rather than at me. "Subject 13, I said, keeping my voice calm. "Can you hear me?" He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. When he spoke, his voice was low and guttural, the words completely unintelligible. It was the same unknown language we had heard from the previous subjects. "Record this," I instructed one of the medics. "We need every detail." The medic nodded, activating a handheld recorder. Subject 13 continued to speak, his words flowing in a steady, rhythmic cadence. I watched him closely, trying to discern any meaning from the sounds. "Do you understand what you're saying?" I asked, hoping for any sign of recognition. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment I thought he might respond in English, but then he resumed his cryptic monologue. "Get him to the lab," Crane said, stepping forward. "We need to run a full neurological scan." The medics guided Subject 13 towards the lab, their movements careful and precise. I followed, my mind racing with questions. What was he saying? And more importantly, what had he seen out there? In the lab, Crane prepped the equipment while the medics secured Subject 13 to the scanner. The machine hummed to life, its sensors mapping his brain activity in real time. "Look at this," Crane said, pointing to the monitor. "His brainwaves are off the charts. There's a clear pattern here." I stared at the screen, the oscillations forming a complex web of activity. It was almost as if his brain was trying to communicate something, but we lacked the means to understand it. "Can you isolate the pattern?" I asked. Crane nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. "I'm trying. If we can decode this, we might get some answers." As the scan continued, Subject 13's monologue grew more intense. His voice rose and fell in a strange, melodic rhythm. "What is he saying?" one of the medics whispered, clearly unnerved. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we're going to find out." The scan completed with a soft chime, and Crane immediately began analyzing the data. I watched the screen, my anticipation growing with each passing second. If we could decode this pattern, we might finally get a glimpse into the mysteries of the void. "Got it," Crane said suddenly, his eyes widening in surprise. "There's a repeating sequence here. It looks like a transmission." "A transmission?" I asked. "From where?" "From out there," Crane replied, pointing towards the airlock. "From the void." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The unknown language, the strange brain activity, the disappearances. It all pointed to one thing. We weren't just exploring space. We were making contact with something beyond our understanding. And it was trying to communicate. I leaned in closer to the monitor, eyes scanning the patterns he had isolated. The data was a tangled mess of peaks and valleys, but Crane had managed to highlight a repeating sequence. It was unmistakable, an attempt at communication. "Can you decode it?" I asked, my voice steady. Crane's fingers flew over the keyboard, running the data through various translation algorithms. "I'm working on it. If it's a transmission, there might be a way to convert it into something more understandable." Subject 13 continued his cryptic monologue, his voice a constant background hum. I glanced at him, noting the vacant look in his eyes. Whatever he was saying, it was clear he wasn't in control. The void had left its mark on him, imprinting its message directly into his brain. "Got something," Crane said, his voice tense with anticipation. On the screen, the garbled data began to shift, resolving into a series of symbols and patterns. It wasn't English, but it was something we could work with. "Run it through the linguistic database," I instructed. "See if we can match it to any known language." The process took several minutes, the computer's progress bar inching forward at a painfully slow pace. Crane and I watched in silence, the only sound the steady beeping of the medical equipment monitoring Subject 13's vitals. Finally, the computer pinged, displaying the results. "No direct match," Crane muttered, reading the output. "But there are similarities to several ancient languages, Sumerian, Akkadian, even some Proto-Indo-European roots." "What the hell does that mean?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "It means this transmission is old," Crane replied. "Very old. Whatever's out there, it predates our earliest civilizations. If the void held an ancient intelligence, one that had been trying to communicate with us for millennia, then our understanding of space, and our place in it, was about to change dramatically." "Can we translate any of it?" I pressed, needing something concrete to go on. Crane nodded, typing furiously. "I'm piecing it together. Give me a moment." I turned my attention back to Subject 13, his monologue finally subsiding. He slumped in his restraints, eyes closing as if exhausted. I motioned for the medics to check on him, their careful ministrations ensuring he was stable. "Here," Crane said, pointing to the screen. A rough translation had begun to take shape, the ancient symbols replaced with fractured phrases in English. It was far from perfect, but it was a start. "We are watching. You warned danger. Not alone." The message was a warning, clear and unmistakable. Whatever was out there, it had been observing us, and it didn't want us encroaching on its territory. "Warned danger," I repeated. "What kind of danger, and why now?" Crane shook his head. "I don't know. But it looks like the void isn't as empty as we thought." Before I could respond, the facility's intercom crackled to life again. "All personnel to the briefing room. Captain Reyes wants an immediate update." I exchanged a glance with Crane. "Bring the data," I said. "The captain needs to see this." We gathered our materials and headed to the briefing room. The room was already filling with personnel, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Captain Reyes stood at the front, his presence commanding as always. "Let's get started," Reyes said as we entered. "Harris, Crane, what have you got for us?" I stepped forward, connecting my tablet to the room's display. The screen lit up with the data we had gathered, including the rough translation of the transmission. "Subject 13 reappeared in the airlock," I began. "He was speaking in an unknown language, one we've determined has roots in ancient Earth languages. We believe it's a transmission from an unknown entity in the void." There was a murmur of surprise and disbelief from the assembled personnel. Reyes held up a hand, silencing them. "What does the transmission say?" he asked, his voice steady. Crane took over, highlighting the translated text. "It warns of danger and states that we are not alone. The entity, whatever it is, has been watching us." Reyes studied the screen, his expression unreadable. "So, we've been observed, do we know by what?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But the transmission suggests it's something ancient, predating our earliest civilizations. This isn't a recent discovery, it's been there, waiting. And now it's warning us off," Reyes said thoughtfully. "Why now? What's changed?" "That we don't know," Crane replied. "But the timing coincides with our trials of the Void Walker suits. It seems our activities have triggered a response." Reyes nodded slowly. "All right. We need to proceed with caution. Harris, Crane, I want you to continue your analysis. See if you can refine the translation and get us more details. The rest of you, stay alert and report any unusual activity immediately." The briefing ended, and the room began to clear. Crane and I stayed behind, discussing our next steps. "We need to run more tests," Crane said, his voice low. "But we can't keep risking lives." "Agreed," I said. "We need a new approach. Something that allows us to gather data without putting people in danger." Crane thought for a moment. "What about drones? We can modify them to interface with the suits, run remote tests." It was a good idea. "Do it. And let's set up a dedicated team to monitor the data. We can't afford to miss anything." Crane and his team worked to modify the drones, integrating the Voidwalker suit's technology into their systems. I coordinated with other departments, ensuring everyone was prepared for the next phase of testing. Finally, we were ready. The modified drones stood in the test chamber. Crane and I watched from the control room. "Initiate test sequence," I ordered. The drones came to life, their systems humming with energy. They moved with precision, stepping into the airlock one by one. As the outer door opened, exposing them to the void, the control room monitors filled with data. "All systems stable," Crane reported. "Drones are holding up." I nodded, watching the screens intently. The drones floated in the void, their sensors scanning the surrounding space. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then, just as with Subject 13, the monitors flashed. "Here we go," Crane muttered, fingers poised over the controls. The static intensified, and the drone's readings spiked, but this time we were prepared. The modified systems held, transmitting data back to us in real time. "I'm seeing the same pattern," Crane said, his voice tense. "Neural oscillations, just like with the human subjects." "Keep recording," I instructed. "We need every detail." The static cleared, and the drones reappeared on the monitors. They were still intact, but their systems showed signs of strain. The data stream was fragmented, filled with the same cryptic patterns we had seen before. "Bring them back," I said. "Let's see what we've got." The drones returned to the airlock, and the inner door sealed behind them. Crane and his team moved quickly, extracting the data and beginning their analysis. As I watched them work, a nagging doubt persisted that we were overlooking something crucial. The transmissions, the neural patterns, there was a connection we hadn't yet uncovered. And whatever it was, it held the key to understanding the true nature of the void. "We need to dig deeper," I said to Crane. "Run cross-references with ancient languages, mythology, anything that might give us a clue." Crane nodded, already pulling up additional databases. "I'll get on it. If there's a pattern, we'll find it." I spent the next several hours poring over the data with Crane. The room was filled with the hum of servers and screens displaying complex graphs and patterns. Every piece of information was crucial. Every detail, a potential key to unlocking the mystery of the void. Crane tapped a few more commands into his console, bringing up a comparative analysis on the main screen. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a section where the ancient language patterns overlapped with the transmission data from the drones. "There's a clear correlation here. These symbols, they match segments of Sumerian texts, but they're interspersed with unknown elements." I leaned closer, scrutinizing the patterns. The symbols were indeed ancient, but there were new, unfamiliar elements intertwined with them. It was as if the message had been updated or altered by whatever entity was out there. "We need to isolate the new elements," I said. "See if there's any way to decode them separately." Crane nodded, adjusting the parameters of the analysis. Each new discovery brought us closer to the truth, but also closer to a potential threat we were ill-prepared to face. The computer beeped, signaling the completion of the latest analysis. Crane pulled up the results, displaying a series of translated phrases next to their original symbols. "We are the Watchers, the Guardians of the Threshold. Guardians of the Threshold." The implications were clear. They weren't just watching us, they were protecting something, or guarding it. "We need more context," Crane said, frowning at the screen. "Without a full translation, we're still guessing." I nodded. "Agreed. But at least we know they see themselves as guardians. Whatever's out there, it believes it has a purpose." Before I could say more, the intercom crackled to life again. "Harris, Crane, report to the command center. We have a situation." Crane and I exchanged a glance, then hurried out of the control room. The corridors of the Acheron research facility rushed by in a dizzying whirl as we raced towards the command center. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Captain Reyes stood at the center of the room, flanked by security officers and technical staff. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. Reyes turned, his expression grim. "We've detected an unknown object approaching the facility. It appeared on our sensors a few minutes ago. No prior warning, no indication of its origin." "Show me," I demanded. One of the technicians brought up the sensor data on the main screen. A small, dark shape was moving steadily towards us, its trajectory precise and deliberate. It wasn't large, but its presence was undeniably ominous. "Have we tried to communicate?" Crane asked, already anticipating my next question. "All channels," Reyes replied. "No response. It's maintaining course." "Prepare a drone for reconnaissance," I ordered. "We need eyes on this thing before it gets any closer." The team prepped one of the modified drones. Within minutes, it was ready for launch. Crane and I watched the screen as the drone shot out into space, its cameras and sensors trained on the approaching object. "Drone is on intercept course," the technician reported, switching to visual feed. The drone's camera feed came into focus. The object was small, barely larger than a standard escape pod. Its surface was dark and smooth, absorbing the light around it. "Zoom in," I instructed. The camera zoomed in, revealing intricate patterns carved into the object's surface, symbols and lines that mirrored the ancient language we had been decoding. "It's the same," Crane whispered. "The same symbols." The object continued its approach, showing no signs of hostility but exuding an air of undeniable purpose. As the drone drew closer, the symbols began to glow faintly with a soft light. "Stop the drone," I ordered. "Hold position and maintain visual contact." The drone halted its advance, hovering a safe distance from the object. The symbols' glow intensified, and the drone's sensors picked up a faint energy reading. "Energy levels are rising," the technician reported. "It's building up to something." "Get ready to pull the drone back," Reyes said. Before we could react, the object's glow flared, and the drone's feed went dead. Static filled the screen, and the technician scrambled to regain contact. "Status!" I demanded, my heart pounding. "Drone's offline," the technician said, his voice tense. "No response." "Damn it!" Reyes muttered. "Prepare another drone, we need to—" He was cut off by a sudden, eerie silence. The lights in the facility blinked once, then plunged into darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, casting a dim red glow over the command center. "What the hell is happening?" I asked, already moving towards the backup systems console. "Power failure," one of the engineers reported. "Backup generators are online, but something's interfering with the main grid." "Could it be the object?" Crane suggested, his voice tight with worry. "Possibly," Reyes replied. "But we can't be sure." Suddenly, a new alert flashed on the main screen. "Unscheduled re-entry detected," the intercom announced. "Multiple entities have appeared in the airlock." My stomach dropped. "Show me the feed." The camera feed from the airlock came online, revealing an astonishing sight. Several figures stood in the airlock, clad in what appeared to be modified versions of the Void Walker suits. Their visors were dark, obscuring their faces, but their posture was unnervingly familiar. "Who are they?" Crane whispered, leaning closer to the screen. One of the figures stepped forward, raising a hand in what seemed to be a gesture of greeting or warning. The airlock's inner door began to cycle open, and the command center filled with a sense of impending confrontation. "Security team to the airlock," Reyes ordered. "Contain them, but do not engage unless necessary." The security team moved out, weapons at the ready. I watched the screen, my heart pounding. The figures stood still as the inner door opened, revealing the corridor beyond. "Identify yourselves," I said through the intercom, trying to keep my voice steady. The lead figure stepped forward, removing its helmet. The face that stared back at us was hauntingly familiar. It was a perfect copy of Subject 13, but his eyes were different, filled with an unearthly intensity. "We are the Watchers," he said, his voice amplified by the intercom, "and we bring a message." The room fell silent, everyone waiting for him to continue. "The threshold is breached," Subject 13 said, his tone grave. "The Guardians have awakened. You must leave this place or face the consequences." The words hung in the air, a dire warning. I glanced at Reyes, who nodded subtly. We had no choice but to listen. "What do you want from us?" I asked. "We seek to protect," Subject 13 replied. "The void is not for you to explore. It is a place of ancient power and danger. Leave, and you will be spared." "And if we don't?" Reyes asked, his voice hard. Subject 13's eyes darkened. "Then you will face the wrath of the Guardians. This is your only warning." The figures turned as one, retreating back into the airlock. The door closed behind them, and they vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. For a moment, the command center was silent, everyone processing what had just happened. "We need to make a decision," Reyes said finally. "Do we heed their warning, or do we continue our work?" I looked at Crane, seeing the same mix of fear and determination in his eyes. The choice was clear. "We have to understand what's out there," I said. "But we need to be cautious. Let's prepare for a full-scale evacuation if necessary, but continue our research in the meantime." Reyes nodded. "Agreed, everyone. Stay on high alert. We'll proceed with caution, but we won't back down." The void had spoken, and now it was our turn to respond. The Watchers had given us a warning, and we had to decide whether to heed it or face the unknown consequences. And as I stared at the dark screen, I knew that our next steps would determine the fate of our entire mission. The command center buzzed with frantic energy and quiet conversations. Every screen was alight with data, every station manned by focused personnel. We were dealing with entities of immense power and ancient origin, their demands clear and non-negotiable. "Run diagnostics on all systems," I ordered, my voice cutting through the chatter. "We need to ensure we're not compromised." "On it," Crane replied, already typing commands into his console. The room fell into a tense silence as we waited for the results. Every second felt like an eternity. "All systems operational," Crane announced after a few minutes. "No signs of external tampering." I nodded, though the reassurance was cold comfort. The Watchers, these entities, had bypassed our defenses effortlessly. Their power was evident, their intentions shrouded in mystery. "We need to regroup and plan our next move," Reyes said, his voice steady. "Gather the senior staff in the briefing room. We need a strategy." As we made our way to the briefing room, the corridors felt narrower, the shadows deeper. The Watchers were out there, observing our every move. The briefing room was filled with the key members of our team, Crane, Reyes, the head of security, and a few others. Everyone looked on edge, their faces grim. "Let's review what we know," Reyes began, taking his place at the head of the table. "The Watchers have given us an ultimatum. Leave or face their wrath. They claim to be guardians, protecting something within the void. They also mentioned ancient power and danger," I added. "They see themselves as protectors, not aggressors, but that doesn't mean they're benevolent." Crane leaned forward, his hands steepled. "I've been analyzing the symbols and language patterns further. The connections to ancient civilizations aren't just coincidental. These entities were worshipped as gods by our ancestors." The room fell silent. "Gods!" Reyes repeated, his voice incredulous. "You mean to tell me these Watchers are the deities of ancient mythologies?" Crane nodded. "The symbols match those found in ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, and other early civilizations. They demanded worship and obedience then, and it seems they still do now." A cold chill settled over the room. The Watchers weren't just ancient entities. They were the very beings that humanity once revered as gods. Their return was a divine revelation, a demand for subservience. "What do they want from us?" the head of security asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Worship," Crane replied. "Obedience. They want us to acknowledge their power and submit to their will. If we don't, they've threatened catastrophic consequences." "Catastrophic consequences?" I asked. "We need to understand what that entails. Can they destroy us? Are they capable of wiping out our facility, or worse?" "Their power is immense," Crane said. "If they truly are the beings our ancestors worshipped, then their capabilities far exceed our own. We can't take their threats lightly." Reyes stood, his expression resolute. "We need to prepare for every eventuality. Harris, coordinate with the security team. Ensure we're ready to evacuate if necessary. Crane, continue your analysis. We need every piece of information we can get." Everyone sprang into action. I made my way to the security hub, coordinating with the head of security to establish evacuation protocols. The facility was designed for such contingencies, but the idea of abandoning it felt like a bitter defeat. As I worked, my thoughts kept returning to the Watcher's demands, worship and obedience. How could we, a group of scientists and engineers, possibly fulfill such demands? And what would it mean for humanity if we did? The next few hours were a continuous stream of events. Evacuation routes were planned, supplies were inventoried, and communication lines were tested. Crane continued his analysis, his findings growing more unsettling by the minute. Finally, Reyes called us back to the briefing room. The atmosphere was tense, everyone on edge. "We've done what we can to prepare," Reyes said, addressing the room. "But we need to make a decision. Do we comply with the Watcher's demands or do we stand our ground?" Crane stepped forward, his face pale. "We can't ignore their power. If they truly are the gods of ancient civilizations, then their threats are not idle. Compliance might buy us time, give us a chance to learn more about them." "And if we refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then we face their wrath," Crane replied, "and based on their history, that could mean total annihilation." Reyes nodded. "We need to think about the bigger picture. Our research is important, but not at the cost of our lives. If compliance is our only option, then we must consider it." The room fell silent, everyone grappling with the gravity of the situation. Finally, Reyes turned to me. "Harris, what do you think?" I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. "We need to buy time. Compliance might be our best option, at least until we understand more about them. We can't afford to provoke them without knowing their full capabilities." Reyes nodded. "Agreed. We'll prepare a message of compliance, acknowledging their demands and requesting more information. We need to show that we're willing to cooperate, but also that we need to understand their expectations." The decision made, we set to work drafting the message. Every word was chosen carefully, every phrase crafted to convey respect and a desire for understanding. The Watchers had given us a warning and we intended to heed it for now. The reply came faster than expected. The main screen came back to life, displaying a series of symbols and patterns. Crane worked quickly, decoding the message. "Acknowledged. Prove your devotion. Construct an altar. Offer a sacrifice. Only then will you be spared." The room fell silent, the weight of the demand settling over us like a shroud. "An altar?" Reyes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A sacrifice?" "It fits their historical patterns," Crane said. "Ancient civilizations built altars, made sacrifices to appease their gods. They want us to do the same." "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, dreading the answer. Crane shook his head. "The message isn't specific, but given their history, it could mean anything from a symbolic offering to something far more significant." Reyes took a deep breath, his expression hardening. "We need to discuss this further. Everyone take a break. We'll reconvene in an hour." We reconvened in the briefing room. The weight of the Watcher's demands pressed heavily on everyone. We had to decide how to respond. Our next actions would shape the fate of our mission and perhaps our entire existence. "We need to construct the altar," Crane said, breaking the silence. "It's the only way to buy ourselves more time." Reyes nodded, though his expression was grim. "Agreed. But we need to be strategic about this. We don't know what kind of sacrifice they expect." "We need to err on the side of caution," I added. "A symbolic offering might not be enough. We need to show them we're serious." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the seriousness of the situation. Finally, Reyes spoke again. "Let's build the altar in the central courtyard. Make it prominent, visible from all angles, and we'll use our most valuable resources as the offering." It was a pragmatic decision. The central courtyard was the heart of the facility, a place of significance. And by offering our most valuable resources, we would demonstrate our willingness to comply without resorting to more extreme measures. "Let's get to work," Reyes ordered. "We don't have much time." Engineers and technicians worked to construct the altar. The structure took shape quickly, a stark, imposing monument that seemed out of place in the research facility. Crane and I oversaw the preparations, ensuring everything was done according to the Watcher's specifications. We selected our most advanced technology and valuable materials as the offering, placing them on the altar with reverence. It felt like a futile gesture, but it was all we had. As the final touches were added, the command center buzzed with nervous anticipation. The altar was complete, the offering ready. Now all we could do was wait. The Watchers didn't keep us waiting long. The air around the altar sparkled, and the symbols carved into its surface began to glow. The light grew brighter, more intense, until it was almost blinding. And then, just as suddenly, it faded. The room was silent, everyone holding their breath. The intercom abruptly interrupted the silence, the voice of the lead watcher booming through the facility. "We have received your offering," the voice said. "Your devotion is noted, but the sacrifice must be greater." My heart sank. We had given them our most valuable resources, and it still wasn't enough. "What do they want?" Reyes muttered, his frustration evident. Before anyone could respond, the air around the altar sparkled again. This time, the figures of the Watchers materialized, their forms ghostly and indistinct. The lead watcher stepped forward, its eyes glowing. "The sacrifice must be of life," the Watcher stated, its voice carrying a weight of finality. "Only then will you be spared." The room erupted in protests and disbelief. Reyes raised his hand, calling for silence. "Calm down," he said, though his own voice wavered. "We need to think this through." "A life," Crane whispered, his face pale. "They want a human sacrifice." The realization hit us like a tidal wave. The Watchers demanded more than just resources. They wanted blood, the ancient rites of sacrifice revived in the cold, unforgiving void of space. "We can't do this," the head of security said, his voice shaking. "We're not savages. We can't kill one of our own." "But if we don't," I said quietly, "we might all die." The room fell silent, the weight of my words sinking in. It was an impossible choice, a moral and ethical dilemma that none of us were prepared to face. Reyes took a deep breath, his expression resolute. "We need volunteers," he said. "It's the only way." Everyone looked around, fear and uncertainty on their faces. No one moved, the enormity of the situation paralyzing them. "I'll do it," Crane said, suddenly stepping forward. "I'll be the sacrifice." "No," I said, my voice firm. "We need you. You're the only one who can continue the research, figure out what's really going on." Crane shook his head. "I've already made up my mind. This is the only way. I won't let everyone die because of me." I wanted to argue, to convince him otherwise, but I knew he was right. His sacrifice might be the only thing that could save us. Reyes nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Thank you, Crane. Your bravery won't be forgotten." The preparations were swift but solemn. Crane stood before the altar, his face calm, resigned. The Watchers watched silently, their glowing eyes unblinking. "Any final words?" Reyes asked, his voice choked with emotion. Crane shook his head. "Just make sure this isn't in vain. Find out the truth." With a deep breath, Crane stepped onto the altar. The Watchers moved closer, their forms radiating with power. The lead watcher raised a hand, and the symbols on the altar glowed brighter, casting a harsh light over Crane's face. "Your sacrifice is accepted," the watcher intoned. "May your devotion be rewarded." The light grew blinding, and Crane's form wavered, dissolving into the brilliance. A surge of energy swept through the room, and then, just as swiftly, it dissipated. The Watchers vanished, the altar dark and silent once more. The room was filled with a stunned silence. Crane was gone, his sacrifice complete. We had complied with the Watchers' demands, but at a terrible cost. Reyes stepped forward, his voice trembling. "We've bought ourselves time," he said. "But we need to understand what just happened. We need to find the truth behind these Watchers and what they really want." The team nodded. Crane's sacrifice had given us a chance, and we couldn't waste it. Over the next few days, we worked to decipher the remaining data, to uncover the true nature of the Watchers. Their demands, their history, everything. We combed through every piece of information, every clue, determined to find the answers. And slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. The Watchers were not gods, but ancient beings who had once wielded immense power over early human civilizations. They had guided and manipulated, demanding worship and sacrifice to maintain their influence. But over time, their power had waned. The void had become their prison, and they had watched humanity grow and evolve from a distance, waiting for the right moment to reassert their dominance. Crane's sacrifice had bought us more than just time. It had given us insight. The Watcher's power was not absolute. It relied on fear and obedience. By understanding their true nature, we had a chance to break free from their control. Reyes called a final meeting in the command center. "We've learned a lot," he said. "The Watchers are not invincible. They feed on our fear, our subservience. But if we stand together, if we refuse to be intimidated, we can break their hold." Crane's sacrifice had not been in vain. We had the knowledge we needed to fight back. "We'll continue our research," Reyes continued, "but on our terms. We'll uncover the secrets of the void, but we won't be slaves to ancient beings. We'll do it for Crane, for all of us." The void was still a place of mystery and danger, but it was also a place of opportunity. We had faced the Watchers and survived. Now it was time to reclaim our destiny. And as we continued our exploration of the void, we did so with the knowledge that we were not alone. The Watchers were out there, watching, waiting. But we were ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to uncover the truth and ready to stand our ground.